Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, I have special guest Michael Tsarion and David Whitehead from the UNSLAVED website and YouTube channel. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having us on.
So a lot of my audience probably isn't aware of UNSLAVED, or if they are, bless them. I think that's great. But I have a feeling that a lot of folks haven't heard of you. So why don't we just start with just a little bit of your guys's, kind of mission and background and why you started the UNSLAVED, media group.
Oh, David should pick that up because I had the website, the URL for a while, and David approached me, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years ago, and had the idea. It's mostly his vision that we pursued, to make it into what it is. But David, definitely you would be better to answer that, I think.
Oh, thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, this was something Michael and I have been working together on, doing various interviews. We did a whole series on Path of the Fool. We did multiple other interviews on various subjects, and we were essentially just doing it for YouTube and putting the information out there. But then I decided, you know what? The production of this kind of media needs to match the quality of the information that we're covering. Because the kind of information that Michael researches and works with is second to none, in my opinion. I've worked with him now for many years on various projects, and I didn't see that it was getting the impact and the attention that I think it deserved. And so I said, okay, let's build something, and we're going to go through the learning curve here because everything's changing online. All the media is changing, the social media, the kind of tools and things that we have at our disposal have changed. So let's see what we can do to upgrade this alternative form of media and really, bring it to people in a way that's going to be digestible, that gives us more ability to bring valid points of research forward, like doing live slideshow presentations and the ability to share web pages and just basically give the viewer an experience where they're not just listening to us talk about stuff. We can actually show them what we're talking about. We can feature guests on subjects that we feel are important and that we're interested in. And so Michael and I just embarked on this journey, and we went through a whole bunch of new, ways of trying to learn how to do this at the same time. And it's been quite the ride, but we're very proud with the product that we produced. I'm exceptionally proud of it. And we're actually currently undergoing some massive upgrades yet to bring it to the next level. And it's a great time for this kind of information to come out. We can see that people are hungry for it. I talk to young people in the area where I live and from all over the world that message me, and they're just so grateful that now they're getting the other side of the story that they're not being told in school or by the media. And so I'm grateful to Michael for his work, his inspiration to do this whole thing and to have patience with me as I build this. And I'm also grateful to all of our members and the people that have supported us. And I'm very excited as to what's going to be coming up next for UNSLAVED.
Right. And so the way I came about learning about your organization, you, Michael, was I've been on a personal journey to demystify the occult. And my journey has taken me in many different directions. But, as a former fundamentalist Christian, it was very, very difficult for me to, I'm just going to say it, have the guts to look at an Aleister Crowley or look at any number of the works of the arcane and all of the different things of the occult. But when I ran into your work, Michael, I was especially inspired and helped by what you were saying, because I think you do such a great job of demystifying these spooky, ooky things and then really breaking it down. And Michael, maybe you could just introduce yourself to my audience as well and give us just a little bit of your background.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Steve. Well, I've been doing it for a long time, and my journey started back in the late 70s and then moving through the 80s and picked up around about Desert Storm, 1990, which, of course, was a time when the wall was coming down. There's a lot of upheaval in the world, as there always is. And that's when it started in earnest, getting back to the States, making use of all the bookstores, doing pretty much what you're doing as well, starting from scratch, the mind of a beginner, I still think of that that's the case in turning around in real time. All the different media that we're I'm learning as much as anybody else right to this very day. It's just that with the new technology that David was talking about, you can sort of turn researches, around a lot quicker, and that includes books, but it certainly includes the video. So it's been really exciting because it was all a hobby up until about 2000. Studying since the late 70s, these materials, I consciously did not want to have any role, in taking it to the public or anything like that, or being a public figure. That was all a set of circumstances. But I'm the kind of person that once, you're handed the ball, you better run with it. So it's been a sort of an adventure. But right now, what we're doing with Unslaved is good because it gives me the chance to dig into stuff I've had on the shelf for a long time. That, to answer your question, there is a alignment, right? A dividing line where some material is appropriate for beginners, and then there's a line actually where there's a point where some people can't leave their prejudices aside, and so you have to create a format more for people who are more serious. So that's what we've been doing in the last couple of years. What that does is it cuts me free then to be very uncensored and dig into very controversial material, some of which you're talking about, but a lot of others as well, and then not have to always pare it down, because it does lose something in the mix when you do that. So right now we have a premium member section, which is some of my best work, top drawer stuff that, couldn't just present because of knee-jerk reactions from people or just simply losing them intellectually. My journey's been a very intense one, and I don't intend to be politically correct or in some other way, curtail what I'm talking about, my vision, just because a certain audience will find it pernicious. And maybe this is, when we talk about female psyche, or when we talk about symbolism or other aspects of psychology, or even a matter like, you're talking about, where the Christian world is just so set and biased. See, I'm not really against Christians in one sense, because a lot of my mentors in the conspiracy movement, the people who taught me, the Ralph Eppersons, the Tex Mars, Eustace Mullins, G. Edward Griffin, they are Christians, aren't they? So it's not that I don't meet with them and join hands. It's just that but a lot of their followers have no interest in joining hands with me. So I've had to throw up my hands early in the 90s and say, well, apart from a few very open-minded people like yourself, my message doesn't go to that group. And as a matter of fact, because of their intense hostility towards me, I've actually become more hostile. I've actually become less endearing of the Christian movement within the conspiracy. Once it was benign, I learned from it, and I can list off, half a dozen names of the great, great teachers in this movement, Dr. Gardner and many others. But see, as time has gone by, and we still have guests like Gary Wayne, it's not, see, we're not the ones who are closed. You got to understand that. I've never been closed. I've been made closed. So any of my writings or words that go out that sound offensive to Christians, you caused it, because we gave you so much time and so much effort to do justice, right? To have you pitch your camp on the field, and to realize that there's many people been fighting evil long before, the birth allegedly of Jesus and all this. They won't. They're very, very coercive, very, very fixed, extremely biased, and a hostile group. So after 25 years of having to deal with them, and then I had, since 2005, I had direct and open attacks from fundamentalists. There's a whole story there we can't avoid to get into, but the sum result was I lost any of the last patients that I had with that group, and then started to be far less concerned about what they thought, and see, they think you're going to go away if they throw sand in your face and rock. People like me don't go away. What is this? Why don't you understand that? We're made of steel. We're bulletproof. We're not going to stop because people, lemon heads and knuckleheads and chuckleheads, and people of low estate, and people who are biased and fixed and prejudiced. I've dealt with 10 times those types of people, in my time back in Belfast and things like that. So I've dealt with all of that. It's not going to work. But what happened, the sum result was it just made us more fortified. And it made us realize that, hey, we can't limit our message because of them or any of these other boogaloo people in the New Age movement, or there's a lot of fringe, freaky people in this movement. But that's fine. My message is not restricted to one group. It's to go out to the universe. It's to go out to the whole of mankind who are starving for this information. And we're not going to let these, we're not let the stone in the shoe stop us climbing the mountain just because it, prevents us getting to the garden gate. I'm going to take that stone out and throw it away and say, carry on. And with David's help, that's what we've been doing. And it's early stages yet. We've so many more plans, but it's going to be top drawer stuff now. We're no longer going to come down and soften it for the, people who should be far beyond seasoned. We're going to wait for that. See, even if they're fewer, fewer people to grab the message, you know, that's okay, because it'll always be a few.
You bring that up, Michael, because I've gone through that similar catharsis in my own development as a creator, and I just don't care anymore. It's like the message that I'm given, or the message that I learn, or the progression, really the research or what I'm doing. And the way I work is I look at it like people are looking over my shoulder. I'm doing my research, and you get to look in on what I'm doing. And right now I'm researching the work of Unslaved. And I really want to know more about what you have to say. But the thing that you agreed to come on and talk about today, which I think is an extremely poignant subject in today's world, is the subject of sorcery itself. Sorcery, the word sorcery, and the application of sorcery in today's world. And speaking of Christianity, it's funny, when I was a fundamentalist Christian, I would look at a word like sorcery or witchcraft or any of those words in there, and my first reaction was, that's all I needed to know about it, was it's in the Bible, there's the word, I have to stay away from it. So I never, ever went to look to find out what it meant. Isn't that funny? I was completely blocked from a whole, body of critical information to my being that explains what's going on in this world, this word called sorcery. So I'll let you take it from here, and I'll just listen.
Well, I mean, the easiest way, I've been dealing with that subject since the 70s, but I do it in a way that involves etymology, symbolism. And the basic message is, for the beginner, is that you're surrounded by it. Later on, you're going to be able to distinguish what is good. This is where the Christians just haven't even got to the starting line. They already presume they know what is good without any apophatic, what's known as an apophatic process of discovering what is not real, what is not true. So I come out of the Steiner, tradition. I come out of Krishnamurti. I'm unapologetic about that. I have got time for Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley. I got time for them all. I got time for Jewish scholars, non-Jewish, Christian, non-Christian. I'm completely a disciple of put your arms around all the information that you can get and then siphon through it and see what fits the thread, So, but again, to answer your question, the easiest way to deal with the fact of sorcery is to teach people to observe it in their life around them, not to come upon the good directly, because that's fake. And anybody who sells you that is a liar and a cheat. To come upon the real, you have to go through the painstaking process of discovery of what is unreal. And that's what's known as an apophatic or deconstruction in the pure sense of the word, not in the leftist philosophical sense. This is just a process that the mind finds easy to do once you set the ball rolling. And in the normal world in which you live, deconstructional thinking is not usually used. It is in some spheres, some science perhaps, here and there, but it's not generally taught to us in school at all. It's always an acquisitive, an aggressive means of learning, right? And that's maybe okay to a point. But once you enter into the occult studies, then the whole premise of how you discover the truth of something changes, and it becomes deconstructive. So by discovering what truth is not, what light is not, what good is not, you come upon what it is. But it's a painstaking process of deconstructing the lie. And so that's what my work's all about. And then there's certain tools to make that easier, like studying the symbolism, studying etymology, the history of words, studying how light is used in commercials, symbolism in general. There's other ways as well. Studying the secret society symbolism without prejudice, trying to get into the mindset of your opponent, ultimately trying to understand, like it says in the Bible, know thine enemy. Yeah, know thine enemy, and what tools they're using could be an adjunct to that. What weapons they're using against you. The Bible's got some really great stuff in it that is actually very apropos to what we're doing here, But there's a certain kind of process that divides the sheep from the goats. Not everybody can get into the swing, of this deconstructionism, and they don't find it something they can do with their minds. It's very Plutonic, to use astrological terminology. It's something that not everybody can do. And therefore, that's it. That's a cutoff point. So words of people like myself will fall, on deaf ears. Just won't compute, because they're going to trust the dictionary. They're going to trust what the expert says. And if you try to tell them to throw that all away and go back into the knowledge and look at it from a different perspective, turn it around like a Rubik's Cube, they're not going to do that. And therefore, the world is in the shit state that it's in, because people aren't doing this deconstructionist apophatic work. And also the second reason is more to answer your question is, if you do start to do it, what a shocker. Why do you think people don't do it? Because the moment that you open that, you first you get a keyhole vision into the occult, the sorcery that's going on all around you. And I emphasize the hidden persuaders, subliminal seduction, all of that. Just start with that. It's a shock to realize that every product you're using, where your dollar's going, the billboards, the magazines, the TV shows, the ad copy, all the stuff your daughters and sons are sucking in and thinking is just so cool. And now they're not even hiding it. The sorcery's in plain sight with all of the weird occult and Masonic symbolism that you see the celebs, wearing. So, I mean, people may have been proved right in our work, 100 times over by the latest, ingratiation, the explicitness of all of this occultism. But I think one other thing that needs to be said about it is, don't go in always rubber stamping it as evil, right? Just because it's occult symbolism. It ties in with what you said about Crowley and these people. These people aren't evil. They may have been bad, they may have been stupid, they may have been grandiose, but not everything is evil. And certainly some of the symbolism, you should not think it's because it's a black cat or a ladder or the number 13 or even 666. It's automatically something evil. Or tarot cards, I've heard they're evil. Right? Okay, I'm not going to convince you any other way, but go in there with an open mind and learn from scratch with the mind of a beginner, and delve into it yourself. So in the Path of the Fool and all these, I've extrapolated all of this, enough. I've even written stuff on Crowley to show you the positives and negatives, and there's very, very great positives in there. And you do yourself an injustice, you see, to come in with bias into a holy work that is very much about self-discovery at the end. And therefore, you want to be able to look into all the mirrors. You want to be able to look into all the chapters that has been hidden from you. You deserve that as a human race, as a descendant of all these great thinkers out of your ancestors. You deserve to know what they didn't know. But if you censor yourself, then how foolish are you to do that? That's really my only message.
Well, when I think about the conspiratorium, and especially our part of the conspiratorium, which, deals with looking at external things that have been occulted from us, right? Either things in the sky, aliens, UFOs, things along that line, right? So I find in the conspiratorium that we have very skilled practitioners in deconstructing, if you will, that which is external. That those things that we see, like the Federal Reserve as an example, or the cabal's control of the government, or the assassination of JFK, or any of those things, right? So we know we're pretty good at that. I see some skill in deconstructing those types of truths, but where I see us really suck is looking at the lower arcane, as it's known in the occult, or that which is true about ourselves, about us, the self, the will. And one of the things that was very poignant in one of your recent discussions about the issue of sorcery, and maybe I put it in the context of, I don't want it to be as broad as all sorcery ever, more in the sense of seeing that what are the modern day sorcerers trying to do to me, the dark lords, the ones that have the hidden hand. What are they trying to do to the public? And more specifically, what are they trying to hide about me from me? And that's where sorcery you really connected with me on that idea that they are using sorcery so that you never find out who you are, what the self is, or what your will is.
Yeah,
Michael?
that's it. Yep, 100%. Agree with that wholeheartedly. It's your psychology that they're trying to hide from you. They'd rather have you be in consensus trance. They'd rather you hoop jump to get some academic chimera on the wall, and you're a big fucking know-it-all, all this kind of crap. Or like in certain, they want you to not even inquire. And that's why I'm a disciple of Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden. They don't want you inquiring into who you are as an individual. That's the cancer. In fact, that's the way that that's the light that destroys the illusion of the sorcery, is individualism and personalism, right? To find out who you are in contradistinction to all of these different affiliations. So that's the key right there. And that's also the goal. See, somebody would say, what's all this industry for? Well, to get you to have even a modicum of heroism and self-esteem. Are we asking too much? It's been eroded for centuries. You haven't happened to notice that? But, from your parents, from the schools, the peers, the gurus, all the rest of it. So my focus, right? Remember you just said, there's been so much expertise in these other fields, and I'm in all of it. When people go after the Fed, or they're talking about even, all the things we love to hear, in these other areas, or chemtrails or other poisons, and the health thing and the legalese thing. There's people who've done that way better than I, and my focus has been from the start on psychology. I didn't know it would plug in exactly how it was going to plug in as time went by. I've learned that the value of it as well, but it was always of interest to me. You see, now we've upgraded it to a very, very high pure level. But even in the early days, I knew that psychology was being it's like I used to say that consciousness has been left at the door, and this is, and it still is. In fact, this movement's getting even worse and worse. If you really want my true opinion, they're getting so caught into headlines and trivia, and they're also splitting into partisan groups as we speak. This is all not good because it's going in the opposite direction. And I've always believed, like Gustave Le Bon has believed and Ayn Rand believed, that we will choose anything. Jung said something about, we'll do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing our souls. And you see that as we speak right now, people are still trying to find any bolt hole. And the more brightly lit it is, and the more, seemingly vital it is, or whatever, the more they want it. It's almost like the mind creates chaos, creates a bunch of broken plaster in order to hide those fine bits of china, and that's the search for the self. And that's always being historic. And I'm just talking about our age, but in any age. And so I'm the one teacher here, that will not allow that to happen, and to try to touch on those other things, but always keep sort of a philosophy and psychology as central as I can. That's going to happen. It's going to continue. I'm just about to do another very long series on mysticism and idealism and things like that. And David and I are going to do a whole series coming up called Prisoners of Childhood, based in child psychology. I've done Dragon Mother, which is with female psychology. So I've done 3 or 4 other recent presentations on psychoanalysis, the unconscious, the shadow work, all of that. So this is what really interests me. And then that's the seedbed from which a lot of other things grow. And I'd like more people, to delve into the psychology, because that's the seedbed. That's the bedrock from which all other escapes, evasions, even if they're disguised intellectually and the window dressing looks real good, and, political action and, philanthropy, but it's all born out of a man's psychology. And whether or not, they have a good relationship with themselves, they have good self-esteem, they understand what a hero is, and all of that fortification. And I don't see that. And so to me, as a sort of my first view is that the Constitution and the temperament is extremely backward. There's women right now stamping their feet because of MGTOW, trying to stamp their feet and say men shouldn't be looking into anything to do with the criminal history of womankind. Says who? Here's an incredible field opening up to us. Here's an incredible avenue that's been, the door's finally been kicked over. And right away, we're getting the resistance. Oh, we're not listening to the culprit. We're not listening to the perpetrator to tell us, hands off, don't look any further into this. No, that's not right. And I wouldn't tolerate it on the other side. Right? These things are reactions, and we need to look at why they are. We don't have the criminal come and tell us, well, I'm in charge of the investigation, I'm stamping my foot, go no further, will you look? You see what I'm saying? It's like, I don't think so. This is, this is adamant. This is very penetrating. This is plutonic. We're going to look under the covers whether you like it or you don't.
Right. And I think, kind of at the high level, I think a lot of people, like, let's just take the word sorcery as an example, right? And maybe you could give us a beginner's level knowledge of what really is sorcery? Is it where I wave my hands around and a ball of light comes out and saps you? Is that how it works? Or what is sorcery?
Sorcery is, like I say, it's in our society. So after a while, when like I said, we started with the early levels, then you go to something more advanced, and you discover that, look, the controllers know that we are in deep psychological, dissociation. And so the sorcery is more of a white magic ritual in which we are not in any way really oppressed in this sort of Orwellian way. There is that factor, but it's not really made in that. That's in the early stages, that's what you believe. It's really based in man's own evasion from himself that is then co-opted by the leaders. The actual story of this is far much longer. It goes back into ancient times and terrestrial cataclysm, a subsequent trauma, which then created the ego to be a rival to the self, the splitting of the brains between right and left hemisphere. I mean, this is what my work gets into. It's very elaborate. But in short, all it is what we call the power elite today, a controller, an evilarchy, right? All that they are, whatever face you put to that, right? All they're doing is co-opting our own psychic dissonance, our own desire to put consciousness, at the door and not factor it in. That's all they're doing. They're just making hay out of our own complicity. Now, what this means in short is that I'm therefore interested not in the master as much as I am in the slave, in his contract with the master to remain a slave. Nobody else touches this in the whole movement. Not even close. They haven't even broached this question yet. What is the slave doing to perpetuate his enslavement?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what he's doing is always pointing over the hill going, it's them, it's them, it's them, it's them. Yes, understood. There are powerful, rich people who want to keep you in a state of submission. But there's also you've had a better chance than your forefathers did, who worked in factories in the fields and who died in mines and were conscripted to war or go to the sea, right? The chain press gangs and all that. We have an affluence that's unprecedented, the middle class. You've got all the tools at your hand to free yourself. And yet all I find is you moving into inauthentic models, following these fucking towel heads in the East, waving the incense, the fucking, all this anti-self-esteem. It's not mysticism, it's mystification. Or you've got the Western versions of it. Or you've got your atheism, this banality of atheism and materialism. The whole cocktail. Again, what I see is some part of you wants to remain a slave. I see it in your relationships. I see it in your relationships with your children and how you treat them and bring them up. I see it in relationship with animals and with nature. So my focus is not so much more, the few on the hill. I'm wary of them. I know they exist and I study them. But I'm also studying this other fact that says, give me chains of gold, Steve. I don't like the ones of iron. Give me 3 stripes. I'm tired of the single stripe. And then when I give you that, you're the next demagogue. When I give you that 3rd stripe, who becomes the tyrant then? Who becomes the tyrant, right, when I kill the other tyrant? Who replaces him instantaneously? The thing is unbelievable when you observe the whole Leviathan of it, right? It becomes very, very deep. And the only answer, to me anyway, the only way to really unpack it when you see this nightmare is psychology. Freudian, Jungian, I don't really, let's not bother with the stupid titles and the rubber stamps. Psychology, understanding the psyche. There's something within us that wants to remain enslaved by somebody, a wife, a husband, a leader, an idea. And what we call the illumined ones are thoroughly aware of this. That's the sorcery. They're sorcerers. A magician understands this too, but he wants to release you from this. Right? A true teacher, a servant of truth, wants to release mankind from the chains which he is tying himself up in. Right? But the sorcerer says, we want to give you more change. We love this. This is incredible. We've even thrown open the door of your gulag and your prison and your Bastille, and you buggers won't walk out. Well, I tell you what then. Let's create a big, close the door again and create a ritual in which you're all part of an energy ritual. And so this thing then takes on an incredible hydra of studies, like ley lines and energy and big social gatherings of the year and the calendar and the solar calendar and the sidereal zodiac. This thing then branches into all the stuff I've made a study. But if you always were to pare it back down, it comes to show you that it's all an act of sorcery in which you are not the victim. You're actually one of the participants.
Yeah, to actually see your complicity in it as you start to look at it, and you start to see it, in that hindsight way that you're talking about, and seeing that I was complicit in it is a very difficult wall to get over to continue your studies in it. Because at some point when you study this stuff, you start to realize, wait a second, I've participated. I'm complicit. I practiced sorcery. I kept people in their place. I was control over. I was trying to flow a consciousness into them that was not them.
I think I said it once before. It's not that I've been sold a lie. It's I bought a lie.
Right.
Once there's an orientation, once you think I've been sold a lie, you're still thinking it's me against them. And there's a trap in that. It's partly true, but there's a lot of lies in there as well. When you say, what have I bought? You move into a wholly different encounter with evil, one in which you're more empowered, and then we deal with the way, then it moves from there then to how you can further empower yourself, right? But you don't do it by re-enslaving yourself to a political party or to a guru or anything like that. And so, like I said, it's apophatic. You've got to be very self-aware, introspective, and find out what you're doing to continue this enslavement. It's like any fool, including the anarchist fools, always know they don't want a master above. Hey, granted, great, you get a star. How many of you know that you don't have a slave below? Right? Ranting and screaming through the streets about no masters above, any thugocracy can do that. We're witnessing that again. That's risen its ugly head again.
Yes.
freeing the ones below you, right? Which really means what? It means empowering those around you, supporting them, helping them, making them see the light, not giving in to a codependent relationship, not allowing them to enslave themselves or to enslave you. You know, all of that dynamic, far harder work. So as we said in the beginning a few minutes ago, that's why people cut off. They want to read all the headlines. They want to have the window dressing, that, you know, pretend that they're into this work. But really, if you scrape off the surface, you find they're mostly very afraid because they've actually sampled what it takes to do this work. And it's an incredibly arduous to walk the Siddhartha road. And David and I now we're tuning our message to speak to those people who have continued to do the work, who've got that level of courage. It's not that we're snubbing the other group, but we realize we have no time to waste our time on people who are, you know, just falling for the window dressing, and they're into your work for 5.5 minutes. But as soon as they get distracted by some other bozo that's talking a bunch of crap, right? They'd rather go over there and follow that, you know, and that's what you're seeing. That's what you're seeing more and more now, with a lot of boogaloo people jumping up in this movement, and they're getting millions of followers. And I know why.
David, did you have anything to weigh in on? I know you've been kind of sitting there patiently waiting for a chance to get a word in edgewise there.
Oh, I thoroughly just enjoy listening. This is great. I was just going to say, I recently posted a really good quote from Robert Heinlein, where he says what Michael was talking about there, where he says, "I am free no matter what rules surround me. If I find them intolerable, I tolerate them. If I find them too obnoxious, I break them. I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything that I do." And so it was something that hit home with me about this idea about what does it mean to be free. And this seems to be a discussion of our time. It's been a discussion for a long time, but we're really hitting ahead right now where we're saying, okay, do we value freedom or do we want more security? And I put security in quotes because it's not really security, is it? If all you're going to do is give all the power of every individual that makes up society to some oligarchy or some centralized control of government that is going to micromanage your life and steal freedom. It just doesn't make sense that people are going to buy into it. So then when you carry that on, you go, well, why are people buying into this lie? It's obviously a contradiction. Well, the reason is what Michael's touching on, and it was his work that pointed me to other great people's work that led me down a rabbit hole of learning about this whole dynamic of our participation, unwitting, unknowing, ignorant, sure, but still, nonetheless, it's what keeps it intact. I mean, because how else would you have a small group of people gaining a power differential over a huge mass of people? The only way to do that, they can't do it through physical force. The only way they can do that is by having the sheep police the sheep. And so when you understand what freedom is, freedom's linked to your self-responsibility. But how can you claim self-responsibility if you don't even know what a self is? You haven't defined what a self is. You're lacking self-esteem because you have no self-knowledge, and you've misunderstood the whole understanding of yourself in this world and in this universe and your place in it. And we're given two dichotomies that are false dichotomies. We're given extreme religion, and we'll put all those religions in there, right? That's telling you, here, you need some vicar in between you and the divine, or in between you and the universe or God. All right. And then on the other extreme, you have the materialists that are like, there is nothing. It's just, it's all determined. You have no free will. It's just a bunch of flying rocks in space. There's nothing going on. We're alone in the universe, or maybe we're not, but it doesn't really matter. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you're given two extremes. And then all these kids are being brought up today with all these pop icons and celebrities and all the media that they're exposed to regularly that's degrading, pornographic, amoral, just completely, it's got no beauty in it, no divinity in it, no passion in it, no power in it. And so what do you expect? So obviously we know there are elements that are embedded into our current society and culture that are toxic, okay? And there's ways to fix that, if only we'd be left alone for 5 minutes to do it. But then we got to also say, no matter what the situation, even in the harshest times, we've seen brilliant minds come out and say, no, I'm not buying into that bullshit. This is the truth. Look at these guys like Bruce Lee or Nikola Tesla or Wilhelm Reichs or all these people we talk about on our show that stood out as individuals and said, hey, we don't have to go along with the program, guys. We can find out who we are, become more authentic, and that's where your power is. With it comes responsibility, though. It comes a lot of responsibility. And so if you want freedom internally and externally, the personal responsibility aspect cannot be overlooked. And sadly, because of the way we've been raised, the influences we've had, the fact that our culture is rotting from the inside out, people are just running. They want to run from it. They don't want to talk about the truth. They don't want to talk about what's really going on. They don't want to talk about where their own faults are or what they need to work on. It's all externalized. And that's it. When you read the writings of some of these sorcerers from history and all the way up into the present day, like these George Soroses and all these other people, when you really read what they're all about, you'll start to see that it's exactly what Michael was saying. It's about pulling you away from your center, disempowering you, and making you someone who is reliant on them. Why do you think we've got socialism coming back? Why do you think right now that's the new sorcery, is to say, you just rely on us. We're the strong ones. We're the collective here. We're going to take care of everybody else. And so give us all your money, all your power, all your influence. We'll consolidate the media. We'll consolidate the government. We'll consolidate the monetary system. We'll consolidate agriculture and science and education, and on we go. And this small little roundtable group of people who aren't moral at all are going to be the ones running and controlling your entire life. And you're running towards that. You're voting for that. You're screaming for that because you're falling for the line that says, oh, they're there to help the oppressed, and they're there to fix poverty, and they're there to stop war, and they're there to fight for women's rights and minority rights and all these things. But then you're starting to get cast into all these categories and no more individual. So it's like Ayn Rand said, we just did a whole series on her, and all the people out there that have never read about her and go out and critique her work, you should go watch those shows because you'll understand what's really going on there, where she makes a statement and says, you know what? Those who pretend to fight for the rights of minorities don't know what they're talking about, because the biggest minority on the earth is the individual. So if you're not fighting for the individual in society, you don't have nothing to do with the fight against some inequality amongst minorities.
Well, you touch upon the idea, or what on its face is a paradox, which is self-responsibility equals freedom. And that's on purpose. And that's an example of what I would call is a moray level of a cultural moray level sorcery, to get you to disassociate. Word disassociation is one of the great forms of sorcery. So what they'll do is they'll take a word like Orwellian and call good bad and bad good and all that to get you confused. But when you're talking about self, knowledge of the self, discovery of the self, and the freedom that the understanding of your individuality and sovereignty bring, is not anarchy. I want to be very careful to point that out. As I've walked down the path of discovery of the self, discovery of sovereignty, healing in that, and then standing in that, what I find goes to that point that you just made, David, which was about the responsibility part. That comes right along with it. It's not anarchy. It can't be. And this is one of the interesting things you said in a recent interview, Michael. You were talking about selflessness, and how selflessness can be applied to the good. Like, I'm selfless, and you use I think the illustration of the Star Wars, the prequel, where ultimately, and also Darth Vader, where Darth Vader was selfless, just like Yoda was selfless. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, just think of it as being that you have thousands of years of phylogenetic programming to be selfless. So in a time of trauma, and that should be a personal trauma, like a breakup or any kind of stress, it's much easier to cluster, right? And instead of trusting your own will and your own intuition, we're slapping. Let's put it in sort of language that Crowley would have said. We're slapping our guardian angel, that's our higher self, in the face constantly. Then how do you imagine that the universe is going to continue supporting you? You see, the weird thing with the psyche is this: the less you listen to it, the less it listens back. And so we are now at the precipice where people have constantly betrayed their own self, betrayed their own intuition, betrayed their own self-esteem, betrayed their own inner child, whatever way you want to think, the higher self, the inner voice. We are betrayers of our own psyche by constantly turning to the misguided for assistance. And so the kind of state of decay that you have today is entirely based on what Ayn Rand said, which is the abnegation of the self. In fact, we don't even have a definition anymore of the self. In fact, it's one of the most contemptible words to most people. Ayn Rand said that herself, that if you say the word ego or the word self, already, people who are clueless will all automatically recoil. Christians will think you're talking about vanity, and hubris, and the rest of the mob also feel that way. So we're dealing in desperate times in which the whole concept of what it is to be a self, let alone a little bit more advanced things like personalism and introspection, and all of that. You almost have to define it again to people if you can, So our work is just to say, hey, we have it present for you a couple of definitions now, so that's not completely lost. So losing yourself in the mix has another benefit, to answer your question, and that is there's a tremendous kinetic energy, like a battery charge, from the crowd. Otherwise, why would people join it? Gustave Le Bon actually went so far as to say that although the crowd looks like a lot of Sturm und Drang and looks like a very busy, active octopus, it's actually feminized, right? This is a marvelous concept that once you've digested it, you understand a lot. That's why a crowd, being feminine and receptive, can be guided by a Hitler or a Pol Pot or a Mao Zedong, right? Or an Obama, right? The crowd is feminine. It looks active, but it's actually not. It's looking for a leader. It's like a headless hydra, right? Now people, and we all need this. Why do you think you go to rock concerts? We all need little bits of this where there's a moment, where there's a sort of a Dionysian release. It's very necessary. It's just like having some body work. But I don't have it all day long, 24/7, do I? There's times when I like to go and feel the roar of the crowd and feel like I'm participating and get a bit of a bioenergetic charge from that. But you should never be dependent on that external energy for your actual life energy. Right? You shouldn't be limited. You should try everything and be part of something. But your real bioenergy should be coming from the deep recesses of your own being. That's what actual real shadow work is, by the way, is the tapping down. It's a process that continues all through life. So it has to do with real healing, real fortification, real immunity, the ordinary physical disease, by the way, let alone psychic attack and all of the barrage of the things we've been talking about, the real sorcery. You counter it by doing shadow work, which is constantly delving deeper and deeper, just like Bruce Lee and the martial arts we're talking about, into the cauldron. Right? If you take out card 14 of the tarot, it shows you the cauldron there. Can't remember the actual technical alchemical name of that cauldron, but that cauldron, is they know about it in Qigong, right? That it's in the stomach region, and it's the place where the boiling pit of your energy is. And you have to be able to tap into that. Otherwise, all the intellectual knowledge I spoke of early on about, knowing a good deal about what evil is still not going to be enough. There's a certain other bioenergetic motion. And this takes us into the realm of then martial arts and very specific kinds of hatha yoga, in order, or whatever you dream up for yourself. I would even go so far to say that we were talking about personalism, wasn't I? Well, yeah, there's a way that you should, part of your own journey is to form an exercise program, a regimen that it could involve in just walking in the forest. I don't care what it is. Listening to music, it could be anything that empowers you, that inspires you on a daily basis, that brings that heroism back to your life. And so that you're constantly tapping into this reservoir of inner bioenergetic power. It's essential, because otherwise the sort of sorcery that you're describing, still will have an enormous power over you. There's something else that's needed. And, that requires Tai Chi and Qigong and, other disciplines that
what are we really talking
physically
about?
Awaken that power.
What are we really talking about when we talk about Tai Chi or Buddhism or any of those types of, disciplines? And this goes back to the realization of the self, and just to kind of ground it for people a little bit, is it's your consciousness. It's the exploration of what makes you conscious. What is the source of that consciousness? Where does it come from? What is it all about? What is the nature of that consciousness? How big is that consciousness? And then that leads you into ideas like, what is a God? Why should there ever be a God? Right? Those kinds of questions. So when you start to really talk about the self, the first thing that I've noticed, and this is even in my personal, as I started to explore these concepts and start to practice these concepts of self-actualization, self-healing, knowledge, is people will immediately start to accuse me of being narcissistic. I'm like, really? I'm not being narcissistic at all. I'm just focusing on my inner self. Have you ever heard that before? Narcissism? But that there is a confidence that starts to well up in you, and that strength. And I can't imagine how I would battle a concept like a conspiracy or anything intellectually, psychically, or physically, or in any other way, if I didn't have that grounding, I would be susceptible to whatever they were doing, no matter how much I knew about it.
Well, we did David was alluding to the ones we did on Ayn Rand. We also did one on malignant narcissism to delve into the fact that when the self, right, and egoism is not the same thing as narcissism. In fact, that's one of the great contradictions. We went into great detail. I've done it in other presentations, but, you know, and people can email us for the list, but they're right there on the unslaved.com site. And one of them is on malignant narcissism to show that selfhood and narcissism are actually diametrically opposed. Now, again, remember I said earlier that this hasn't been taught to us in school? That's one of the reasons. So this debris, right, this false thinking has indeed infested the world, in which the moment that you talk like we're doing right now, everyone puts it down, you know, to narcissism. This is utterly nonsensical, and I'll just make it very, very brief by saying that narcissism technically is self-hate. So how this went wrong, well, it's just one more crazy thing that happened in our society. Narcissism, any technical person who studied 5 minutes of real, you know, psychoanalysis or psychology or even clinical psychology, for goodness sake, know full well, even the most mainstream person in a white coat who studied, you know, clinical psychology knows that narcissism is the emanation or the consequence of a person who's in deep self-hate, who needs the approval of the crowd like you can't imagine. His entire psyche depends on it. And then modifies their behavior pathologically, right, to get the approval. And the next step to that would be, even no matter how much you cosmetize yourself, right, to get the approval of mommy and daddy and the teacher and the crowd and all of your peers, you still don't get it. That's called life, right? You don't get automatically what you want. And that's the birth of neurosis. Actually, it's almost secondary neurosis. The first neurosis is even the motive to want the approval of other people. But now you're into the Ayn Rands and some heavy duty stuff to get you out of that. That's why we recommend it. That's the big antidote. But before a person can even go there, look at how much resistance. The secondary narcissism is the one you'll encounter the most, which is the fact that now that you haven't got the approval on tap, that is the beginning of the normal, familiar cocktail of neurotic tendencies, right? In which you're now breaking down, you're becoming frantic, you're becoming passive-aggressive, obsessive-compulsive, striking back at the world psychotically, low self-esteem. It must be something I'm doing to not get that. All that cocktail is a secondary, but you know, the one that most people are trapped in. Actually, behind that is even a deeper one of why you need the approval in the first place. See, if you can untie that knot, the rest of it falls away. And then you wake up and you're enlightened and you go, what have I been doing? What have I been teaching my children? What the hell? You know, but that's quite a journey. In the beginning, all you're going to meet are people who are absolutely pathologically neurotic, desperate for an approval of the misguided. Look how much self-effacement. I said earlier that we're slapping our own self in the face. We are. And there's lots of professionals out there who know this, but very few are doing anything about it. But coming back to the bodywork aspect, though, maybe David can, you know, speak more about this, because see, unlike Jung and other people, I take a very Reichian view. This is Wilhelm Reich, where when he didn't say what I'm saying in exact words, but he meant it throughout his work. If you study the greater body of his work, what I'm going to say now is exactly, you know, a presse of it. And that is that when you do yoga means reuniting, retying back to something. Yeah, the self. When you do shadow work, you are saying, you're making a statement. So even if it's only stretching or walking in the forest or listening to me, you're doing it consciously, let alone more assiduous, you know, practices like the martial arts. But you are making an actual statement to your own psyche of saying, I am now turning to face myself. And I am negating the energy flow because I become a slave the moment that I need it for my sustenance. I've got to turn back to myself and say, you either have that energy or you don't. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm going to find it within my own bioenergy now, so that I have ample energy, not only to defend myself against the inauthentic world, but when I enter into my vocation, the demand on my energy to be that artist, to be that, you know, speaker, to be that filmmaker, to be that writer, to be that teacher is overwhelming. Where am I going to get that bioenergy from? And the answer is, well, you're not going to get it from the crowd. That gives you a momentary high or a momentary inspiration, but it's very lethal, because if you do the Anthony Robbins approach, then you become totally dependent on the approval of that crowd. I've got to turn within and find the power within myself so that I can always draw upon it no matter what happens. And that is the goal of life. And I mean, there's nothing second to this, you know, and that's why we constantly recommend that you physicalize this and you do get involved in some sort of, you know, martial arts program, or at least you do the lower level of it, the beginning exercises. You've got to focus on this, because too much sitting and intellectualizing, the beast is already going to destroy you. It already knows how to play that game of chess with you. Mm-hmm. What is happening is that your energy quotient is very low, and tapping into it in a much more deeper way, I think, is absolutely crucial for our times, because we're under attack, not just physically though, but also psychologically and emotionally. And if you don't have that reservoir to tap into, you'll be destroyed. I mean, it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think a beginner's level idea, and then David, I'd like to hear your thoughts too, is that, I'm a beginner, so I'm going to give you my beginner's ideas, all right? So my beginner's idea is I've learned recently now is if I feel unsettled, like I feel unsettled about an idea, or I feel unsettled about whatever it is, unsettled, that feeling of not being put together, right? I've started to discipline myself to go into a state of meditation until I'm leveled out. Just a simple idea like that. Just not getting into all the authors or anything like that. Just thinking about me. I'm going to stop and I'm going to calm my ass down until I'm at a state of peace and a state of non-motion and settled. Just one idea, just that one idea has been tremendously difficult to do. to talk about the dedication it takes to really move into this, David. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I'd say just from my own personal experience, growing up, we all go through our challenges, but I remember going through a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety growing up just due to circumstances that were present in my life. And for whatever reason, just sitting in prayer, which is what I was taught to do, or sitting in some kind of static meditation, it didn't work for me. It didn't resonate for me. If that works for people out there, absolutely go for it. I think that's an important part of things. But I would suggest to start to think about movement of the body as a way of getting the movement of the mind going, right? Okay. What does Bruce Lee say? He's like, running water never goes stale. So the reason why a lot of times when we're sitting too sedentary in our lifestyles already, and then we try to address only with one element of the branch of this tree of all these tools we have at our disposal of just static meditation, we can limit our ability to actually heal the body and heal the mind simultaneously. And I think this also has to do with the way that, here in the West, we compartmentalize everything. We compartmentalize the body and the brain and all these and a skeletal system, muscular system. And it's great to, look at that from a physical sense and go, hey, this is all the different elements that make me who I am. But then we forget to come back to the fact that we're talking about you as a human being, and you have all of these faculties at your disposal, not just one, all of them. So for me, what helped me come out of that sort of dark experience growing up was I did two things. I played piano, and I just played it for myself, by myself. I'd literally, my dad was doing all the sound and stuff for this church locally. So he gave me the key. I went to the church, they had a beautiful grand piano in there. I would lock the door, turn the lights out, and just go to town. And it was just a way that it was a way of having my mind and my body active to a certain degree. And it would help me combat a lot of those inner stresses, anxieties, fears, worries, all that kind of stuff that's pent up. And then the other element that was huge for me and has made me the person I am today was obviously getting into the martial arts. And I've been on the both sides of the martial arts spectrum. I've been on the extreme. Martial arts has become very much like religion and all of that, where it's these cults and the cult leaders, and it's the opposite of what it should be. Which was when I found Bruce Lee's work, it changed my life because he came out and exposed that in the martial art world, both in the East and in the West. He was hated in his time for it. He's only famous now because of the movement of history. But when you read his writings, he was trying to say, no, you need to come into a form of individuation and learn how to express yourself uniquely. Realize that you're unique. There's definitely the ABCs of something as complex as martial arts or playing a guitar or whatever. But at that point, once you've learned all the mastery of those elements, then it's about creating your own masterpiece. That spoke to me. And when I started to engage in that process, moving the body and studying combat, this is what was unique about martial arts as opposed to like yoga or Pilates or whatever, lifting weights. It was that you were studying the art of war. And to many people, and I talk to parents all the time when they bring their kids in my studio about this, they look at that as a negative thing because they're like, well, we want to be peaceful and we don't want, it's this overly pacifistic, altruistic society that we have. And you realize, no, but what about the internal conflict? What about that war? I'm not talking about training you so you can go out and stomp people in the streets. What about developing a spine, developing self-esteem, having a healthy body, mind, and spirit, and learning how to defeat the enemy within? All those doubts, all those fears, all those anxieties, all those things that are probably built into you now because of what's going on in society and your parents and all these things, right? Plus whatever you've contributed to it on the way. How can you possibly only unravel all those Gordian knots if you're just sitting on the top of a mountain cross-legged all the time? Okay, so there's an element of that. But for me, it was about physical meditation, hitting something, moving through something, breathing while you're moving, thinking a certain thought in your mind about addressing a certain issue and combining that with an action. That to me is the next level. That is the next level. It's not the only level, it's the next level. And so this is how I started to see it is as if you're exercising your own demons, literally through a physical medium. And I believe this reaches the average person very quickly. Whereas some of that out of the box, floating in the cloud stuff, it doesn't really compute for people. When you say to some child, for example, okay, that's suffering from self-esteem, like they won't even look at you. Their head is low, shoulders are up, right? Hackles are up all the time. And you show them something that they can do where on the spot, they're able to prove to themselves that they were successful in that moment. So I take them, I show them a technique, and I teach it to them like I'm showing them a magic trick or something. Like, hey, someone grabs you like this is what you do. Boom, look how easy that was. And then you get them used to it, and you start to see their eyes light up. You see their back straighten a little bit more. And then give me a couple months and they'll be even more. And then give me a year, give me 2 years. Suddenly these kids, they're out getting top grades in school. They're finding the job of their dreams. They're finally getting that girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. They're finally getting something going in their life. The parents then come in and they sign up because they realize they're missing this. And then I show it to them. And it's the idea that you can prove something to somebody. And not that I can prove it to you, but that I can give you the tools to prove it to yourself. So it's a combination of physical action, mental action, spiritual action, all being focused into one point. And the result of that is what every genius ever has said about why they're a genius or what it was that made them, that separated them from the average folk, right? It wasn't that they were better or had privilege or any of this crap. It was that they realized this truth about the human being, that you are a holistic being that possesses all of these beautiful attributes. And when you learn how to sort of venerate the body and venerate, like worship, like in a way, like the ancients, they used to worship the body, and the religions would go, oh, don't worship the body. You want to get out of this body as fast as you bloody can. And all the glory and all the roads paved with gold and all the 72 virgins, that's after death. And only after you've served a hard life of being a slave. See, that's lies. That's lies. The truth is that heaven and hell exist right here and now. And it's about where you apply your action and your will as to what kind of experience you're going to have. So this to me is true magic. We're talking about sorcery. Here's the antidote. It's magic in the truest sense of the word. Understanding what the controllers know about you, that you have multiple dimensions to your being, that you were not put here to be a slave, but you have to participate and take action to free yourself. And that's the message of the project that Michael and I put together. And it's something that gets me fired up every day, as I'm sure you can tell.
No, you remind me of a recent book that I just read. It's not The Art of War, but The War of Art by Stephen Patterson. I don't know if you've read it, but it addresses, it addresses this very thing, but it's in the context of a creator. I'm a creative person. I'm a writer. I'm a producer. That's what I like to do. And so I was given this as a tip, to say maybe this will help you with your book that you're writing, because I was kind of stuck, and I'm writing a book. And this is what Patterson goes into, and it's just another angle. So you came at it with the Bruce Lee martial arts idea. Patterson comes at it from the idea of the creative person that's struggling with their art. And what's so interesting about what you said and what Patterson and what I've heard Michael say in the past too, and lots of people say, including Bob Dylan and all these great creative geniuses that would say the same thing, is they somehow tapped into a greater, now listen, a greater daemon, power, voice, creative energy, but they had to fight the resistance to be distracted from their own will and their own self. And to say, this is your wheelhouse. What will you create today, Steve Olson? What will you create? What will you bring out of the ether into reality? What are you going to do? That can only be done if you resist the distractions away from understanding what we're talking about here today, guys. And I know it's a lot. We're putting a lot on your plate out of the blue. Steve Olson's talking about the South today. But anyway, Michael, what do you think?
Well, what's the point of all the abstract if we don't talk about solutions? And that's where we're going right now, and it's so important. If you look around and you see all the overweight people, and people are in I mean, I see it. It's worse than ever. A lot of people have recognized that. There's also a rise in pathology, with all of the medication and everything. But if we don't even bother talking about that and just talk about
all kinds of viruses and all kinds of the rays of pathology is what he means, guys. Go ahead, Michael.
Isn't it incredible? But let's just keep it on a dietary basis. People, you talk about the sorcery. Diet is sorcery. The crap is just take the nicotine, the sugar, which would probably be the biggest killer, but there's also, the caffeine and all of that, right? So just a very simple amount of sorcery that's operating right in your level in your diet, and then, as we've been saying, in your exercise or lack of, that's sorcery. So you don't need to start in the clouds at all. You start with your body, and you start to look at the sorcery on the most physicalized level. In the inability of you to even be in command of your own physique. That's what is so key. And then you can include, in the last couple of premiums shows I've done, presentations, this thing of man as artist has been central, right? The thing I did on auto rank, but even the thing on mysticism, and I'm sure it'll come up again in the future. Art, some of the greatest thinkers in our world said that your whole reason for being here is to be an artist. Given that you're already a work of art. So you just need to snap into the fact that man, right? This is how the Pythagoreans saw us. That's how the Greeks and the Romans and all the high cultures saw us. Is that man is a work of art. He has not forgotten that, because just look at the slop that they're calling art today. I mean, goodness me, right? But the original paradigm was that man was already a work of art. The house that he lives in, his ambiance should then reflect that in whatever way, even if it's in a humble way, order, cleanliness, and so on. When you start to see that many ill people around you, you obviously know that before I talk to them, mostly, their minds are going to be in an equal disarray. So obviously you must, as a teacher, then focus on the fact of this physical ill health, this physical question. It's always been important, but it's vitally important now, because if you don't have this chi flowing through your being, if you don't have the access to the prana, and we're not talking master level here, I'm just, even on the basic level, then how can you be invigorated? How can you have any kind of optimism? Those then become just words or mental states. Optimism is a whole body state. Like depression and pessimism is a whole body state. Well, my mind's depressed, but I'm still going about, as everything else is normal, driving my car and taking the kids out. No, a depressed person is completely depressed. He can't move. Doesn't want to go out, doesn't want to engage with life, right? So the optimistic person does. Now, if you've been relying all your life, you see, on the approval of others for that energy, that's why you get depressed. It's because you are in a catch-22 situation. You've checkmated yourself in the game that you've been playing with yourself. And no doctor, no medicine is going to get you out of it, right? Because you have entered into a contract in which it's a no-win situation for yourself. And depression means exactly that. Energy has been suppressed. Because it's energy, it's of the dark, of what we would call the dark emotions. It's anger, it's rage, and it should be. It's fine. You should let it, come out. But you don't, because you've embodied an idea, just like the overweight person has embodied an idea. I'm not worthy. My self-image is so goddamn impaired that it's okay for me to be this couch potato, this slob. I'm so unworthy to live. I can eat all of this poisoned, toxic food. You see, it all comes back to psychology, as we said earlier. Now we're proving the point. So the person who has seen what they're doing to themselves ceases blaming anybody else. even though, of course, it doesn't exonerate companies, and they are all ones putting the sugar in. They're putting all these poisons in. But again, you still have the ultimate freedom to say, I'm not spending money on that crap. I need something that's a lot better. Cut those things out. First, do it by just, 50%, cutting it all down, the red meat or whatever, or the cigarettes or whatever it might be. And then going from that level on. And you will see immediately the physical result. But when we talked about deconstructionalism when we opened, the same thing applies here. Everybody who's even dabbled in homeopathy knows that the moment that you cease taking the drug, you get worse. So now we're really on target of what we were just sketching in earlier on. Everybody who tries to go cold turkey, withdrawal symptoms from the lie, from the poison, you don't get better, you get worse. And so this is why the state of decay, perpetuates itself, because the real journey to enlightenment has these pitfalls, and people give up and go back to the lie. So therefore, willpower, in the sense that Otto Rank and Ayn Rand have talked about, is vital. And believe me that if you're not a person who is able to do that shadow work, and you're not doing the physical aspect, you won't have the willpower. I guarantee you will not have it. And then when you meet these resistances in your own being, you will fall back and you won't be the warrior. The warrior is the one who says, I'm meaning it. I'm meeting this very powerful adversary. But instead of backing off, he says, good, because only the great have great enemies. And now you step up. Now you step up and you say, I'll not only destroy you, but I'll do it with, like a Legolas arrow through the third eye. Just watch this. So you take a challenge. It's not to defeat you. It's not to give up, which is our whole culture has been, no child left behind. Everybody's on the same level. What are you talking about? Where did this come from? Everybody is not equal. I don't want them to be equal. Equal in what? Equal in misery? I don't want to see equality. I want to see heroic children teach the next gen, the ones that are looking at them, to be heroic. And I'd like to see that chain reaction. But to do that, you have to have heroes at the top, don't you?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
And the sorcery is to take them down, to nullify that, to just smear that off. So the children have no concept of what you're talking about. There's no concept of mastery in archery and calligraphy and poetry and dance and motion and act. In 10 years, nobody will be playing the violin anymore. Why should I do that? I got all these gadgets. I got my cell phone. I got my, technology. Who wants to play that silly old thing? This hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. And it's happening across the board. They're going to soon be telling you that some of the great things that we have taken for granted for decades, for centuries, the young kids, their mothers and their fathers are saying, oh, well, you won't get master in that anyway. So let's move you on to something else. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it starts with the physical, and taking what am I trying to say, is taking responsibility for your own physique. And then you will find the energy to go to the next level. Right. And then it moves forward from that point.
Yeah. And the starting point is to recognize that you have the need, that you must start to take responsibility for yourself. That's where it really starts. The moment that you say, wait a second, the reason I'm the way I am right now, and I'm getting away from the victim programming that you've always heard, the reason you're the way you are is because of the choices you made. Period. There's no getting around it. Yes, like Michael said, we do have malevolent, beings and all these other things that are always trying to get us off our game, always try to push us off. But if I don't even get to the starting point of taking responsibility for me, for what I have done to this body, this temple, or what I have done to my relationships in my life, or any of the mess that you find yourself in, if you can't start with that very simple idea that I am ultimately, the buck stops here, I am accountable for it. If you can't get there, you're not going to go anywhere with us in this journey. No, nowhere. Because you got to go there first. And then here's the thing I would say is when you finally get to that point where you really see your complicity in following the mob or following the tyrant or following whatever that is and really taking self-accountability, you're going to feel a lot of pain. Yeah. Because you're going to have to, Christians call it repent. I don't care what you call it, but there's going to have to be a soul time where you're going to say, I no longer prefer this. I don't want this for myself. That's when the turn starts to happen. That's when to use the Christian story, the prodigal son, that's when the prodigal son came to his senses. He comes to his senses in the pig slop and the mess that he was in, and got up and turned around and started moving back to himself again. That's what he did. All right. So I don't mean to preach, and I didn't want to monopolize, but before I let you guys go, though, one of the things that you touch upon, which I think is a fascinating area of study, and there's no way we could cover even a tenth or millionth of what Michael talks about and David talk about in their unslaved media world, but it's the idea of how we've been brutalized by cataclysm. That is our subject, one of the things we do talk about. And I'm always afraid that I'm just re-traumatizing this ancient part of the human being every time I talk about cataclysm. And so this is kind of me also having a self-catharsis with you guys, and just to say, how did cataclysm play into all this, guys?
Well, I mean, it played in with the fact that there was terrestrial cataclysm. That's just as simple as that, and not one, but many. But the one that I think was the biggest one is probably 13,500 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was of such proportions that, to cut a long story short, the psyche of the whole human race was severely damaged to the point of a psychosis. And by the way, if you really look at around you and you factor this in, now everything stands explained, because a lot of that psychosis is still there. But to go at it more positively, what we call the ego, right, was the part of the consciousness that got salvaged. So any of these paths or paradigms that slam the ego, drop it, run. Because the ego is like the galvanizing, it's like a circuit board that was smashed into millions of pieces, right? But slowly some parts came together, and it's not the consciousness that we knew. It's not ancestral consciousness. That's more in the right brain and the back. That's preserved in the deeper recesses of consciousness, which no materialist will ever acknowledge, even though they damn well know it exists. They're playing a chicanery of unimaginable proportions. One day we'll have to have a program about that. But the fact is, we have our left brain ego cognition, that's holding us all together. And so what's been going on since 13,500 years ago to right today is a process of healing, a process that's been sabotaged many, many times. And so apropos to what we were talking about the way that the controllers get the control, like when David so correctly said, it's a sheepdog mentality. How can just one shepherd control the flock? Is because they're again using something psychological to do that. And that is that every time they pull the rug with a war or a rumor of war, they're actually stimulating, this catastrophizing from which we're all traumatized. And then all the defenses come up. When people define what the ego is, it's a massive defenses. Yeah. Did anybody ask why that is and what you do about it? Right. So consciousness as we know it is already skewed, already like a ship that's been, Titanic. I mean, it's already, so that is why we're already in flight or fight. We're already in this primitive mode of thought, which is why we think in terms of big bangs and animal evolution and materialistic. A lot of these are protections, right, that the ego has defended itself with, because of what's happened in the past. So my work delves so deeply into the past because it explains what's happening now. Most of the orientation of the ego, the lenses that it has to view reality, all of its settings are based in such a fear, such a flight and fight, such a trauma, that you've got to factor that in before you can explain the bizarrities of atheism and materialism and all the other isms and ologies that our life is full of. All of our insecurities are based in a deeper wound, right? But also I've said we should, since we're on solutions, and we're talking about Unslaved, the whole program, one of the great underlying, sometimes we explicit, it's made explicit and other times it's not, but it's the implicit theme that runs under Unslaved, is that you've already got all the solutions. It's called the past. It's called history. Any problem that can come up, it's been a center of my message from the beginning, but it's even more emphatic now. And that is that there isn't a problem socioeconomically, sociopolitically, psychologically, or philosophically, that some greater mind than you can ever fucking imagine has already solved it. Right? And yes, if you want to talk about the Bible, who wrote Ecclesiastes? Who wrote the Psalms of Solomon? Right? I'm including all of that. I'm including some text and scriptures. I'm including the Book of Enoch. Right? I'm including many of these well-known texts. Not the Quran, just to make that clear, but other ones that are sane, or semi-sane. But then there's a whole other bevy of greater works. That's all I've ever shown. and even a little bit of Crowley or a little bit of whoever, right? It's a big, interesting mix. And the person who's really a seeker after truth, he acknowledges that. But again, just in short, the idea that you've got a thing called a past, called history, with geniuses of unimaginable ability, both men and women. We mentioned Ayn Rand. I've done a recent podcast on great women. Right? We have already got the greatest reservoir, the great Aladdin's cave of answers to any problem that the world could ever throw us at now. Already made and done. And therefore, there is therefore no excuse for a shadow of pessimism. Pessimism is only when you don't know, you haven't read the key of the map, and you haven't opened the first chapter. And again, you're not connected with your bioenergy, and there's many other dimensions to that. I hope we've made that clear. But you can't be pessimistic if you understand that it's the forces outside you that are trying to make you pessimistic. That's part of the sorcery, to get you depressed, to get you fatigued. Oh, what can a little person do? You know, it's all over. It's finished. Finished? How hard was it to build civilization before it began? That's the tough part, right? The Schillers and the Schellings of all, you know, and all the great minds I could mention, all the great Shakespeares, right? They have already built civilization to a very high degree. We're just meant to bloody preserve it. And look how poor we are at doing that. But when in doubt, go back, read your historians and read your Ayn Rands and read the great sages, and then apply their solutions. This is one of the great sources of optimism, you know, that is, again, anyone listening to us who's even a complete beginner. And then people go, oh, but Michael, I've got no time. You know, I'm running around here, I have no time. Because I know you don't. So make it. Your first heroic act will be to make that 1.5 hours or 2 hours where you sit down and read. Or like you mentioned earlier, sit down and do nothing. You know, just be still in nature. Replenish yourself, because one thing we almost forgot to mention is that one way to replenish your chi, your natural bioenergy, is to go into nature, even if it's only for, you know, an hour or so. But do it regularly, you know, where the chit chat and the chaos stops, and you plug back into nature. I mean, that's, again, it's almost ridiculous that we have to even remind people of this, but that's the world we're living in. So, okay, I'll remind you then. I will do that. I will make sure we go back to basics. But
one of the reasons why that's so important is because it eliminates all the distractions, and it's just you and nature. It forces you to have to focus on the self.
Well, right. That you've nailed it. Because remember, the society in which you live, the culture, is the reflection of your ego. Nature is the reflection of the self. So anyone who wants to actually shift gears from the hard ego, the ego is instrumental. You'll always need it. But those who want to, you know, change the center of gravity. A more psychological way of saying it is that you move from the superego to the ego ideal. You know, we don't want to get into, or the conscience would even be better, moving from the ego settings of the superego to the conscience. All of this involves returning to nature, but it's not going to nature. It's the way that you go. The meditative aspect is that, okay, I'll just go down to the park and sit there. No, it's the manner in which you go. It's reuniting and recommuning with nature in a way that is, you know, needed, that's deep. So it's not just taking the pooch to take a shit. You know, that's not what I mean, or bungee jumping or something. No, it's a very reverent return to nature as your teacher in the Emersonian way. You know, this is a whole other meditation. So meditation doesn't mean sitting in a cupboard, you know, and trying to stop your thoughts. We don't mean anything like that at all. I want you to think. I want you to get more thinking. I want you to have more critical ability, more judgment skills. But I also want you to be able to feed yourself, you see, through the other centers. I want you to keep your, you know, energy and your bioenergy fortified. And nature is a huge, huge way of that. And the more you go to nature with an open mind and a sense of awe and wonder and astonishment, you know, the more and more that you'll then reawaken that rapport. Because as I said, when you so slap the psyche so many times and deface it and disfigure it and betray it, in the end, it will no longer work with you. That's just the fact of the matter. But the more that you say, I'm sorry, and you go back reverently, and you're gentle and you're sensitive with life, with the elements, with reality.
With yourself, be kind to yourself. Go ahead, Michael, sorry.
Right. Yeah. And in other words, end the self-sadism. As we said that narcissism is built on self-hate, self-sadism. Selfhood is based on self-love and self-esteem. So that, you know, we've done a lot of podcasts on that. That is a vital, vital aspect of what we're doing on Unslaved, is to try and bring back these teachings of what it really means to not only understand, you know, what you need to get rid of, but then what do I replace it with? So it's a very, very, it's a very homeopathic system. And we do know that a lot of our audience aren't going to get that. And that's okay. They're not ready yet. That's fine. You know, there's definitely a point where the pain and the tribulation, and people haven't really clicked into their heroism to realize, like I said a few minutes ago, the greater the adversary that comes in front of me, it's just a manifestation of my own greatness, because only great people have great enemies.
Oh, that's a great place. So, David, could you? Yeah, obviously, we have your website up here. We'll have links below. What's coming up on the Unslaved agenda here in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, for sure. If I could just, I'll throw a quick comment in there based on that recent chat there, just to finish up, and then I'll go ahead with the details. But I was just going to say, you were both talking a little bit about pain and avoidance of pain and trauma and all of this stuff from the past trauma, and then how, you know, some of these elements within our society today kind of pick off that and try to keep re-traumatizing you. On the other side of that, you know, coming as a martial artist to this, I always tell my students, we're here to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Kind of a weird contradiction, but it's the idea that if you want growth, if you want to be stronger, faster, have better endurance physically, be healthier physically, there's an element of suffering that has to go into it. And it's called legitimate suffering, not illegitimate suffering that's based on hiding from trauma that you should be facing, or passing the buck and blaming everything else and everybody else. That's different. We're talking legitimate suffering where you're becoming the hero. And to become the hero in your own life, there are some of these roadblocks you're going to have to overcome. And as Michael's saying, that it's like as if nature has this natural process where if you want to climb higher and you want to achieve more or experience more or reach a certain place on any level of your being, there's going to be that next level of challenge coming your way. And I've seen this in my life. Steve, I'm sure you've seen it in yours. And everybody listening can have their story with that. But what tends to happen is because of the fact that we've been highly traumatized and encouraged, we've been encouraged down that road to become pessimistic, as opposed to seeing, addressing the trauma, facing the trauma, opening that, you know, going under the rug, looking for the cockroach infestation, going in and facing your fear instead of running from it. You know, we're not talking about the absence of fear or the absence of these things. We're talking about facing up to it. There's so much more power to be gained from that. And I'm training a bunch of kids right now. We're going to go compete in a local tournament, right? And in the age of everybody wins and everybody gets a medal just for showing up and nobody has to really strive to succeed, it's a rather interesting conversation that I'm having with the parents of these kids, where I sort of have to put them through quite the struggle in order to prepare for that kind of competition. And I do have to prepare them that they might lose. I mean, a lot of them, it's their first tournament. They've never competed before. And I'm like, you know, we have to go there with optimism and training hard. But remember, it's about the experience. It's not about the medals. It's not about this or that. You win by showing up to this dojo every day, giving me your best, showing up on the fight day and putting your game face on. That's how you win. The result will be the result. And we'll take from that, we'll learn, and we'll keep growing. But don't be afraid of a challenge. Don't be afraid to flex your muscles. Don't be afraid to get knocked down. Don't be afraid to have to tap out or don't be afraid of it. Let's face it. That's what warriorship is. So it's the same with this spiritual path. So my message would just be from what I've learned and from what great teachers have taught me, learn how to become comfortable being uncomfortable in a legitimate way. Don't become self-sadistic. Don't be stupid about it. We're talking something legitimate here, where that's where you're going to find out what you're made of. If you can find out what you're made of and then keep pushing that bar a little bit, who the hell's going to be able to take you down? Who the hell's going to be able to scare you? Who the hell's going to get in your face and tell you what you should be thinking and what you should be doing with your life? Fucking nobody. Okay? And that's what we need. We need some people with some spines walking around here. Not where they're aggressive, not where they're overly macho, chip on the shoulder, but just confident enough to stand in their own skin and accept who they are with all their strengths and weaknesses unapologetically, and to truly go on the path of being themselves. So that's just my final comment on that. I hope it helps people. It's helped me. And we're going to continue talking about this in many different ways on the Unslaved podcast. Sunday this week, we have Scott Onstott returning. I love this guy. He's fantastic. He did the documentary that's on YouTube. It's got millions of views. Secrets in Plain Sight. He's a genius. He lives on another island close to where I live here in British Columbia. So we're looking forward to having him. The following week, we're bringing back Ralph Ellis, who is just, I mean, I can't say enough about the man. His research is second to none. He's a huge friend of ours, and he's been working with Michael for years. So we're going to be getting into the Arthurian legends and studying mythology and some of the recent discoveries that he's made. We've got some other fantastic guests lined up. And most importantly, I'm very excited that we're going to be building Unslaved into the next level. We're going to be incorporating our own private social media, so we don't have to be succumbing to the dark lords of Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all that stuff. So we're basically building our own safe space where you can come and participate in real discussion with people that don't, they're going to sit there and have a real conversation with you. We've got some amazing tools we're going to be bringing into the program, and I'm very, very excited about it. So the website is unslaved.com. Follow us on Instagram. We're posting stuff there daily as well, unique content. You can just look us up at Unslaved Podcast on Instagram. And stay tuned. If you want any updates about show or time changes or details, follow us on our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook, look up Unslaved Podcast. We're posting in there regularly as well. And support shows like this, people. Support Steve and what he's doing. Support the Unslaved Podcast. Support independent alternative media, because we are the resistance. And you have to put your money and your value where you actually find it. And if you put that energy towards the people that are doing this work with integrity, you're going to get more people wanting to do it. It's going to encourage more people to do it. And the more the better at this point, because I'm sure you can agree what we're seeing happen right now online with the censorship and accounts getting taken down, and you can't say this and you can't do that. And like, it's just getting over the top. So Unslaved is a resistance to that. And I'm very, very proud of being part of it and where we're going to go from here.
Right, and I would say here's a Crowley quote. I'm going to end up with a Crowley quote. I think it's a Crowley quote anyway. A moral or an ethical man knows the right thing to do. A moral man does it. I challenge you, and that's the definition of a heroic act, by the way. It's when you move from ethical to moral. I challenge my audience and everybody out there today, one moral act, just one. That's a heroic act. Do it. One today. Just do one. Any final words, Michael?
Oh, I agree with that. There's even science now, neuroscience, that says maybe thought follows action. We've got it so around the wrong way. We think first and act later. This is considered a standard, and yet it may not even be true. It may be that the physical body and its action is the primary, and that thought is derivative. Thought is a kind of mental action. This is a very key aspect of even the most modern science, but it's very much the principle of sort of a spiritual life. It also is a re-recognition of the role of nature, an engagement. But your body is part of nature, isn't it? So there's a whole wellspring of inspiration, of vital energy, prana, and when you have that prana physically, you'll have it mentally. Because you're going to need it. Because all the talk of sorcery and all the talk of the enemy and what we've got against us, it is pretty frightful. But not to the person who's fortified and who's got those, who's able to tap into that wellspring of power, both intellectually, but also emotionally. It's a key aspect. To leave out the physical is a big mistake. It leaves you wide open, to failing basically at the end of the day. So anyway, Steve, great. Thanks for having us on, and we'll definitely have to reciprocate and have you on, catch up, have updates on all of these subjects.
And I appreciate you guys and the work of Michael Tsarion, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Tsarion, right?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then David Whitehead can be found at Unslaved. They also have several other places. We'll have a list of links below for you guys to find out more. And we'll be talking to these guys again soon, because it's time, guys. It's time to heal the self.
Yeah.
Steve Wilson, WSL.